Welcome back to the Seafarer Social Podcast. I am here today with Bhavna Pant from ATPI. Bhavna, thank you so much for joining me. Let's get straight into it. Could you tell me a little bit more about what ATPI do as a business?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Carl. I'm Bhavna, and I represent ATPI today. And ATPI is the world's leading travel management company. We are a market leader in marine travel. We've been in this business for over 100 years, Carl. And I would say we've grown along with our clients. As they've grown their business, we've grown ours. We actually enhance our business based on what the marine industry needs today, what our clients looking for. So our growth, our technology development, I would say all thanks to what the clients and our customers want today. So it's been a fantastic journey. And I'm here to talk to you about some interesting stuff on how we contribute to the marine industry.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here. And I think that this is a really interesting subject. It's not one that we've covered before on the podcast, which is the travel arrangements of seafarers. In fact, actually, I mentioned just before we started recording that recently, in fact, I was reading a report, I believe it was Air France, and they mentioned how from seafaring alone, the maritime industry brings them in somewhere between 2 to 300 million euros a year revenue. And that's just one airline. That's not mentioning Qatar, that's not mentioning Emirates and all the other airlines out there as well that are constantly flying seafarers around the world. So really, this is a huge, huge industry. Yeah. And one of the things I'm really interested in talking to you about today is how we can ultimately, better the experience for seafarers. One of the first things that come to mind is the Qatar Airways lounge that they have for seafarers. Have you? I'm sure you're familiar with this. Did you hear much about how this rolled out? Why it was Qatar did this, and also how do we get more companies to focus on creating a more luxury experience for seafarers?
Right. I mean, that's a very good question, Carl, and a very good observation as well. In fact, Qatar and ATPI have worked very closely, especially during the COVID times. I recall when COVID was a crisis situation across the world. Mostly for our mariners. And that's when we also redesigned how we worked. We partnered closely with a lot of airlines, but Qatar in specific. I recall we transferred around 400,000 seafarers during that time with chartered flights that we partnered with Qatar on. And that was also around the time the Seafarer lounge, etc., came on board. So I think Qatar has been always forward thinking in how to make the seafarer experience better. And when you talk about, how do we work towards making that seafarer experience even better, I believe it's just important to just step back a little bit and first understand what are their challenges actually. Because once you know their challenges is when you can make those better, right? And there are a couple of things that come to my mind. The first being, as a seafarer, once you've completed your contract, you've packed your bags, you're waiting to meet your family, your partner, look at your kids' face, and you suddenly get to know that, hey, the visa rules changed, or the only flight out of that port has actually rescheduled, which means your further connections have now to be rescheduled. And that hits you hard, right? Because that's the sheer uncertainty of how you're going to sign off, for example. And at ATPI, I would say in Asia specifically, these challenges get magnified even more because you have so many nationalities. Each nationality has different visa requirements. Then there is weather to play with. You have your typhoon season, you have your rainy season, which again reschedules a lot of flights. So for a TMC, I can say it's a big headache, but think about a seafarer, it's an even bigger challenge, right? So that's there. Plus, I also think, and I've seen a lot of cases, is documentation. Documentation as a pressure point. You are in the midst of your journey because you had multiple transit points that you had to take somewhere, you missed out on your paperwork. It impacts, it derails the entire crew change. There are cascading effects which have a financial impact as well. And lastly, I would say the humane side of it, which we can of course talk about in detail later as well. The human side, which is the shore leaves, or I would say rather the lack of it. And there is data backing all of these things. In fact, I was reading about the Mission to Seafarers Happiness Index, which came down last year substantially. And one of the key drivers there was the shore leaves
Yeah.
that were denied or became stricter in a lot of ports. So your seafarer suddenly felt that they were stranded. Imagine a 9-month contract and you can go to the shore just 3 times or 4 times. That impacts the well-being phenomenally. Right? We like to go out on weekends, have a treat, meet friends, think about them on the ship, on the water all the time, and having these restrictions along the way. But I'd also say, while there are these challenges, but things are looking better. There is a silver lining. In fact, I believe this year the Seafarers STCW certificates, the standards of training certificates, have now become digital. And that's amazing direction, right? Because now at least you don't have to worry about being stuck or being worried about not carrying paperwork at a port or an immigration counter. Those are positives as aspect. Now, let me give you a bit of a TMC lens to it. Now, when you're working with a TMC who knows about these challenges that a seafarer faces, there are a couple of things that I will highlight in terms of improvement areas. One would be have a lot of buffer in place when you are managing visas, right? You got to make sure that you have ample time before you plan your crew change. Make sure that your travel management company of choice speaks ship language because that really matters. See, disruption is part of travel. That's an uncontrollable. But when that hits, you got to have people who can be agile and respond fast. They know how to get a transit visa done really fast. Look for a transit hotel or come up with alternate options through secure hubs. Because the goal should always be of a TMC is to ensure that the crew change doesn't get impacted. It's a costly affair. So the goal is to have tenured consultants working 24/7 in marine desks to ensure that each time a disruption hits, we're able to pick it up and make sure we respond to it ASAP. Lastly, I would say, and this is another thing that I noticed from COVID times, and there was such a positive change. The Seafarer certificates were getting renewed at the time of COVID crisis online, right? You would remember that time card. And it was such a refreshing change. And as we got past that crisis, auto renewal or online renewal only happens in certain jurisdictions. And it would be wonderful to have that continue to give our seafarers that flexibility along the way. So these are some of the things I believe that our audiences would relate to on what's happening, the frustrations they share today.
Yeah, I think it's so important to really make sure that that journey for the seafarer is optimal and well planned. I mean, when I go traveling for conferences or whatever, and I'm making a flight from the UK to Asia, you plan that journey out. So typically, you try and get the best layover time. Hopefully, maybe you can get an extra legroom seat so you can be more comfortable. Maybe you plan a day rest where you get there before the conference, so you have a day to optimize to the time difference. And the reason why is because actually doing a day of traveling, going from one time zone to the next, it really, really takes it out of your body. Now, for a job like seafaring, it's incredibly important that when they get to that vessel, they are optimized, they are feeling refreshed, they're ready to go. So I guess my question to you then is, from your experience, what is the sort of gold standard when it comes to planning an optimal seafarer's journey? What are the sort of things that you go for? If cost wasn't a problem, if the shipping company just said, look, I want you to make sure that the 25 guys you're sending to me are feeling refreshed and ready, what does that journey look like?
Right. Wow, that would be amazing, right? To not have any cost implication when designing
Not
the crew fair
realistic, but
journey.
it'd be
But
interesting.
yeah, but I'll tell you something, a bit of a background before I tell you what the optimal journey would look like. Here the role of a crewing manager is really important because they set the tone with the travel management company. Looking for the cheapest marine fare of the day versus the cheapest logical marine fare of the day is going to give you two different outcomes. And usually their KPI or the thought process is the cheapest fare of the day. And the cheapest fare is not going to be a direct flight or a one-stop option. It's going to have multiple transit points. And when you have multiple transit points, that means your exposure to a missed connection, your exposure to travel fatigue is much higher. So think about it. Here you've saved money on paper, but what you've not realized is that there were so many hidden costs along the way that to get the next layover, you had to probably think of two transit 2 nights of transit hotel, give them meal option, meal vouchers along the way. So your total cost of trip actually gets impacted. And that's a miss that a lot of the companies have, which we always, support and talk to them about through our data. We talk to them about total cost of trip versus just looking at the line of airfare versus how much are you actually paying for that entire journey. So I would say the gold standard in planning a seafarer journey would be to go for the most logical marine fare for that journey. Okay, and that would mean have layovers that are required. Plan a layover in such a way that there is enough time for them to grab a snack, grab a few wings before they continue the next leg of the journey. And I would also say have them have communication and connectivity together. Connectivity would be, having a seafarers having those SIM cards, right, to
Yeah.
speak with their families along the way. Hearing hello from your loved ones or telling them that you're okay just
Yeah.
elevates the stress of everybody,
There's no
right?
worse feeling, no worse feeling than being on a long haul flight and you get to your connection and the airport's Wi-Fi is rubbish and you have to sit around for 3, 4, 5 hours with no Wi-Fi. Your
Right.
family are wondering, are they okay? I haven't heard from them. They're meant to be in Dubai now. They're meant to be. Well, you
Yeah,
wouldn't get that problem in Dubai because Dubai is brilliant. But where are they? That's the
yeah,
worst feeling ever. So I think actually you're right. It's something as simple as just providing an eSIM, I think, can create
correct,
such more a relaxing experience
correct,
for the
correct.
seafarer.
And communication from the crewing team. Don't leave them in a limbo.
Yeah,
Talk to them.
yeah,
Talk to them regularly. Tell them, even if there is a bad news, tell them about it and tell them a plan of action. And there's a term that I often use. It's called duty of awareness. You would have heard of duty of care in a travel management company ecosystem that's used very often. Duty of care, where we are making sure that the data goes to a third party travel security provider, providing pre trip, on trip reports, traveler tracking, and all of those things. What we also need to create is duty of awareness. That means how aware is your crew on the checklist of what to do should there be a travel disruption?
yeah,
Are they supposed to call the crewing manager? What if it's late at night and he hasn't picked up the phone? Is he to buy a ticket by himself for the next domestic flight? Or should he actually be calling the travel management company supporting them so they can, take care of things? And we've had so many cases, Carl, where the airport staff, depending on his mood and his information in hand, he may think that the transit visa is okay or not okay.
yeah.
And that's where the seafarers panic. If they were to give us a call, there are often that our consultants are speaking to the staff and telling them this is the latest regulation and this is what you need to do to speak with your manager. Maybe you don't have the updated records, and things get resolved there and then. So that duty of awareness also needs to come from the company to tell their people that you're on a long journey, but we are there with you every step of the way. So that also
Is
feels
it
better.
when a seafarer is traveling? So let's say there's a seafarer going from, let's say, Manila to Rotterdam, right? So let's say he does a changeover in Dubai or in Qatar or Istanbul or something like this. When he or she has that layover in one of these big airports, let's say there's a 4, 5, 6 hour layover. Does the shipping company typically pay for the snacks and food that they'll buy in between in that layover?
Yeah, mostly. I would have to give it to them. Most of the global shipping companies would take care of their crew well. In fact, this year I've sat in a lot of reviews where some of the big names in the industry also want to improve the class of travel for superintendents,
Yeah.
for auditors. They are okay to put them on premium economy if the costs difference is XYZ, depending on what we agree upon.
But one of the things I've always thought though is if you go to somewhere like Istanbul or Dubai, right? And you go to the McDonald's just to get a simple cheeseburger meal, it's going to cost you like it's because it's super expensive. It's like 15, 20 euros, right? And that's just getting you a Coke, some fries, and a burger.
Yeah, yeah.
But sometimes actually it makes more sense to pay for a lounge pass because the lounge pass may be only 30, 40 euros. You get to be somewhere where you're comfortable, you can relax better. You've almost always got good Wi-Fi. You get unlimited access to food and snacks, and it just makes the whole journey experience much better. Now, I know obviously we mentioned Qatar Airways as
Yeah, the
created a
Doha
maritime lounge.
song.
But I've always thought, why not create like a mandatory, and there are third parties where you can buy passes
Yeah,
cheaper as well. Why not just make it mandatory that all seafarers, if they're doing a layover that's more than, I don't know, 3-4 hours, they
yeah,
must get a lounge pass? Because, and the reason why I say that is because there's nothing I find more sad, because you can tell a seafarer from a mile away. They usually have the man bag, they're traveling with it, and there's nothing more sad than when you see a seafarer who's stuck in an airport somewhere, waiting for a layover, and he's sleeping on his bag on the benches, waiting
yeah,
for his flight to come in. You just think, this guy's is traveling for the next 20 hours, and he has a job which is incredibly important. It's super important that he's optimal and feels
yeah.
refreshed when he arrives. Why don't just pay for a lounge pass?
Right, right. I mean, I feel what you say, right? I mean, it's just so logical to take care of the people who are actually going to do the most important work for you when they are going to be on board. And there is statistics also actually. If you look at the IMO reports, they say 25% of the most serious accidents that happen on board are from fatigue. And
Yeah,
that's not just fatigue from what the work they do and the vessel, but also the travel fatigue that they carry on to the vessel when they get on. So would you rather have a seafarer take a week's almost rest before he can actually focus on the job than just get him refreshed and in a situation where his sanity is still intact and he can focus on key work aspects. So what you said is very important, Carl, because organizational safety is a very important aspect that companies need to start talking about a lot. And I'll go back to what I said earlier on, and I think I mentioned it before we started the podcast, is nobody should start a contract exhausted. That's the
yeah,
worst feeling to be in. And here there are key parties who play that role because your crewing teams, your crewing managers are actually your champions to present that information to ship owners in their reviews when they're discussing travel budgets. So we are providing data of total trip cost. We are providing data of how much would those extra soft perks would cost you versus the only airfare. And those are your champions who need to present that data to the right people who sign off that cost. And that sets the tone of what we offer them when we are. I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks back, we were handling sign off from Jakarta for a fairly large crew size. And we were in discussion. It was a very urgent request. Little time, but it had to happen because of vessel ETAs, etc. When we designed the journey, we realized that the next point of transit is going to be a very short turnaround time for the crew to get to the next connecting flight. So when we offered that, we were proactively telling the crewing teams, we've offered you this journey design, but it's only going to work if you have your port and manning agents there take care of fast track services for the crew. If that can happen, it's going to reduce half the time of them to, for security clearance, immigration clearance. If that happens, they can make it to the next level. And of course, it's on them to say yes and be okay with that add-on cost. But they also appreciate the fact when we go to them and tell them this is what's going to work based on our experience, because we've done it so many times. We know the success rate for
yeah.
it, and it happened beautifully. I mean, they also had a time to grab a snack. The crewing team was telling me. So yeah, you can have success stories when partnerships like these happen, and they make use of the data when speaking to the right parties.
Yeah, I think that's so important. One
Yeah.
of the things that's being thrown around a lot at these conferences when we talk about seafarers is retention. A really big problem in the industry is being able to recruit talent and keep talent. And when I speak to seafarers, we talk about what is it that motivates you for this job, what keeps you around. Almost always, the first thing they say is pay, naturally. But I wonder, how important things like travel come into this as well. Like from an employer's perspective, how important is it to get the travel experience right for their seafarers? Because I said to you before we started, just the other weekend, I watched the Leonardo DiCaprio movie Catch Me If You Can, and you see a scene where he's a pilot, so he's walking through the airport, and
Yeah.
he's looking beautiful in his uniform, and all the air hostesses are around him, and he's this
Doing the
super,
part.
yeah. But do you get the same experience for an officer from a seafaring officer? You don't. It's not something that's recognized.
Yeah.
They get access to board the flight first. They get access to do fast track mandatory, and I just think these little things that
Yeah.
actually cost that are fractional in cost. Really, I know that when there's 25 of them, maybe, but really, I just think that the experience you give the seafarer from the moment they leave their house, it gives them a sense of pride. And if you have a seafarer that's coming on board a vessel with their chest out after having a really lovely experience traveling, they feel important. They give a better output in their work. Yeah, I guess going back to the original question, how important is it, do you think, to optimize the travel experience for retention?
Right, right. Well, this is such an important point, and I can see the ship owners starting to take heed to that, actually. Because let's face it, Card is going to be the supernova. That's what decides that dotted line that they sign off, right? But I would say travel is like a bookend to every contract. If that journey design is frustrating, it's almost dehumanizing with multiple stops, that entire contract gets colored. And you would hear when you if you attend seafarer seminars or their events, and you hear them talk firsthand, they will, when they're reminiscing their seafarer stories, they'll talk about their time at the vessel, but they'll also mention the long queues that they had at the airport, the reroutings that they had because of geopolitical situations or for weather conditions, the multiple transit points just to reach the port. They'll have multiple stories. So travel will always play an important part subconsciously in their mind, whereas pay, of course, will take the front seat. And I'll take you back to what we spoke about earlier on, the Seafarer Mission Happiness Index data. The another point that it talks about is a direct link between mental wellness and how, and their shore leaves. It talks about how well their journeys were planned and how good was the connectivity for them to speak with their families. So if you see here, it's nothing to do with pay. You can earn as much as you want, but if
Yeah.
these basics are not met, the pay, the cash wouldn't matter at that point. So I would say, your pay is the foundation, but travel is the glue to your contract. So that's when you work with a travel management company, make sure how they design the journeys needs to be extremely well balanced.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, I've had it in the past where, when I'm going away somewhere and I look at Skyscanner and I book a flight and I try and save myself, $150, and maybe I go from a one connection to a two connection, adding an extra 5 6 hours to the journey, and flying overnight. That's the worst as well. When you're
Yeah.
flying overnight, you get into an airport at 2 a.m. and you got to wait till 5 a.m., 6 a.m. till the next one. You always think during the process and once you arrive, God, I wish I just spent that extra $100. Like, it would have just made this whole experience so much better. And I think that the most important part is sometimes the value is the time you get back. And I think that actually, from a shipping company's perspective, they should be identifying that the optimal trip will give them the optimal seafarer for a longer time period. I think it's incredibly unfair to give a seafarer a 29-hour, 2 free stop travel experience and then expect them to come on board and right, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's unrealistic. And I guess the other thing is the connection you made there. You mentioned it slightly about the mental health side. How do you see a connection between a safe, predictable travel experience and a seafarer's mental health once they're on board? What's the connection you see there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about it logically. As humans, right? If I'm put in a situation that I am not used to, or if I suddenly be in a situation where I don't know what should my next step be, your body will suddenly go into a defense mechanism and your stress hormones will go up. It's the same thing. If a seafarer has a chaotic journey planned, and I'll say this again, see, disruptions are a part of travel. Seafarer also needs to focus on what's controllable and what's outside their control. But if they aren't aware of who to reach out to when disruption hits and they feel that they are in a limbo, that's where your stress levels and you feel that you and your time doesn't matter to this company, right? And they
Yeah.
start thinking otherwise. But conversely, if you have a well designed journey which has a confirmed itinerary, you know what are your layovers, you have your travel management company reaching out to you offline or through digital applications telling you if there are gate changes, flight changes, You have an option to upload your digital certificates, option to share your itineraries. Similarly, for crewing teams also, I would say, if they can track their seafarers through a tracking system, when they're handling multiple crew changes to say at which point, where is my seafarer, which of course we do offer to a lot of our shipping companies that we work with. If they're able to track their seafarers, it kind of elevates their stress level also, because they know these are the risk zones and this is where they are at this point, and they are okay because you can have customized messaging along the way. So the more you keep the journey predictable, and I would say that's the future of travel actually, Carl. It's going to be predictable, it's going to be digital, and it's going to be frictionless. And I would say a lot more human, because everybody's starting to slowly realize, because there's so many conversations by people like you and people outside who talk a lot and support the seafarers as essential workers of this industry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's becoming more abundantly clear just how important they are. In fact, it was just the other day I was booking flights. I booked flights out to Manila actually for me and my family, and I booked them for Emirates. And I
Mm.
realized on the booking system, when you click the individuals you want to book a ticket for, so I got 2 adult tickets and then 1 child ticket. I saw that there was a section that said overseas worker. So
Mm.
so the part of the experience now is your typical adult fare, your typical child fare. I think there
Yeah,
was like a specially assisted fare, and then there was an overseas worker fare. So
yeah,
that just goes to show you that these airline companies are identifying more and more how much of an important mass this type of airfare is to their revenue and their bottom line. How often do you guys speak with the airlines directly and talk about how we can optimize this journey for seafarers?
yeah. This is an ongoing partnership, card. This is a regular engagement that we have at a company level and also at an industry level very regularly. So airlines are actually expanding the marine fares a lot, which is great because marine fares, they offer a lot more flexibility to a seafarer. They'll give them higher baggage allowances. There's an opportunity to rebook and reschedule them at lower penalties. So that, which means if you've missed the connection or there's a reschedule, you don't have to worry so much about reinstating a marine fare. So that's great, and airlines are offering that a lot more. But I also say there are partnerships with port and other welfare organizations as well. The one that comes to my mind right now is the Pilbara port in Australia, which now offers ship-wide free Wi-Fi. And that's an amazing direction we are going in, right? So it's the industry, I would say, coming together to recognize seafarers as essential workers along the way. So it's the airlines, it's your welfare organizations, ports, everybody coming together to give them what they should deserve.
Yeah, totally agree. Final question. Let's say that there is an ordinary seaman from the Philippines who's listening to this right now, and let's say he or she has typically over the last 2 years in their contract, they've always started their journey off in Singapore. So they flew Manila to Singapore, really simple journey experience. But let's say they've now got a contract of a new shipping company, and that shipping company has said, right, we need you to come to Houston, or we need you to come to Rotterdam, or we need you to come elsewhere, and they're now going to do their first big
Hmm.
connection flight. Right? They're a little bit overwhelmed. They're a little bit nervous. They've not done this kind of journey before. What are the number one tips that they should be considering throughout that whole experience?
What a beautiful question, Carl. Because it's often said that your journey, your contract doesn't start at the gangway. It actually starts the moment you step out of the house and you ends when you return home. So for any seafarer who's starting on his first maiden contract, I would say have your sanity toolkit. And I'm going to keep it very simple. Have a sanity toolkit. What does that mean? Have things in that make you happy. It's going to be a long journey, buddy, right? And I would hope it's an uneventful one, but you always got to be prepared for disruptions, etc. So have things in it that make you happy. Have your chargers, you have your digital copy of all your certificates. That's very important. Have some snacks in place, if possible, cash. But more importantly, when I spoke about duty of awareness earlier, know your points of contact. Who do you need to reach out to in case there's a disruption? Who is your travel management company? Who do you need to call if you need any clarification? If you have all of that, Just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Well said. Thank you so much for your time, Bhavna. It was great speaking to you.
My pleasure, Carl. Thank you for having me over.
Thank you.